2021, a team of investigators surrounded a luxurious lakeside house nestled in the peaceful town of Gainesville, Georgia. During their search, they discovered a box of popcorn carefully hidden under blankets in a bathroom closet, inside which was a computer containing $3.4 billion in Bitcoin. Jimmy Zong had acquired these cryptos a decade earlier, but he had no idea of the ordeal he would face. After years of living large and spending millions to impress women, Jimmy made one mistake that led to his downfall. Jimmy Zong was never the popular boy in school. As an Asian kid growing up in Cobb County, Georgia in the 90s, he felt a bit like an outsider. Kids mistreated and bullied him for being fat, ugly, and weird. The worst experience, according to him, was when they pulled down his pants in front of everyone at a football game, and his parents weren't there to support him. First-generation immigrants from China, they were trying to make ends meet in a foreign country. His mother worked as a night nurse, and according to Jimmy, she was rarely present. His father, on the other hand, never found a stable job. He would pick up cheap stuff and try to sell it for $1, and when he wasn't doing that, he'd retreat to the basement. It was his parents' divorce when he was in middle school that became the focal point of his dysfunctional childhood. For a struggling young child, not having a supportive family didn't help. Jimmy yearned for social acceptance, but he had no friends. However, amidst this chaos, there was a sanctuary where Jimmy always found refuge. His room, upstairs, a haven of peace isolated from the world, filled with digital dreams. There, in front of his computer, he dived into an ocean of infinite possibilities. Every day, he woke up that old machine like opening an enchanted book and spent hours exploring endless universes. In middle school, he had learned multiple programming languages. In Jimmy's words, the computer allowed him to fantasize about creating a perfect life. Jimmy didn't know it at the time, but soon, this digital escape would make him one of the richest people in the world, with practically no work involved. In 2008, Jimmy graduated from Central Gwinnett School with an almost perfect score, which enabled him to secure the prestigious Hope Scholarship. He decided to go to the University of Georgia to study computer science and thought this would finally impress his parents, but unfortunately, they didn't care at all. So, at 18, he packed his bags and moved an hour away, never speaking to them again. Once on campus, it was a fresh start. Jimmy says that's when life really began. During his first year at university, shortly after the Christmas break in early 2009, Jimmy came across a post on a programming forum about a new form of digital currency called Bitcoin. With his talent for programming and sharp sense of innovation, Jimmy became one of the early adopters, starting to mine Bitcoins on his laptop, earning a few hundred coins per day. But back then, Bitcoins were almost worthless. A guy Jimmy knew had managed to sell 5,000 of them for $5, but that wasn't even enough to pay for a case of beer. So Jimmy turned off his miner and forgot about them until 2011, because all of a sudden, they were now worth $30 each. Jimmy, having just heard the news, wonders where he stored all his mined Bitcoins from 2 years earlier, but he can't find them. He doesn't know where he saved them on this laptop. Thus begins a desperate attempt to win them back. At 21, Jimmy creates an account on Bitcoin Talk, his username referring to a Mercedes-Benz 300 SD, the car he had always dreamed of, thinking it could impress the girls. Interestingly, Jimmy's first post was about Bitcoin mixing. It turns out that since every Bitcoin transaction is public information on the blockchain, it's not as anonymous as people think. Crypto mixing is a technique that involves mixing Bitcoins across numerous transactions to make the digital trail harder to trace for potential detectives. And Jimmy was well aware of this. At the same time, the Bitcoin Ponzi site, of which Jimmy was a huge fan, decided overnight to shut down. But Jimmy, being a talented programmer with a 6-year computer science degree, took on the challenge of creating his own version of the game. Between this website that took a commission from users playing on it and getting back into mining, he earned a significant amount of Bitcoin. What's more, he managed to recover many Bitcoins he had mined in 2009, although 5,000 of them remain lost forever to this day due to a hard drive failure. Maybe one day, if a data recovery expert got hold of this lost treasure, they would make a fortune from it. At that time, one Bitcoin is worth around $5, and it seems Jimmy has more disposable income than he ever had before. So, what does he do? He uses this money to party, starts drinking every weekend, has many blackouts, and also likes to take coke. Actually, this was the beginning of Jimmy indulging in this white powder every weekend for a period of 6 years. And it's partly because of this drug that he was going to become a billionaire in a way he could have never imagined. While Jimmy lives out his rockstar fantasies on the weekends, a new website hosted on the darknet is gaining popularity, the famous Silk Road. You can find any drug there, you just have to pay with bitcoins. Jimmy hears about the reputation of Silk Road and starts using the site for personal amounts, but after only a few transactions, he decides to withdraw his remaining bitcoins because his local merchandise is much better. During the withdrawal process, he accidentally clicks the button twice, and to his great surprise, both withdrawals go through. He receives double his bitcoins. Jimmy has just discovered by chance a huge coding flaw that no one has known about for over a year. So Jimmy, with his quick fingers, wonders how many withdrawals he can make. He gets to work. On September 19th, 2012, at the age of 22, he creates a new account on Silk Road named The Tormentor. He deposits 500 bitcoins, then spams the mouse button, making 5 withdrawals in 1 second, earning him 2,000 bitcoins. Later in the day, he does it again, making another 1,000 bitcoins, 3,000 bitcoins in total, which were worth $30,000 at the time. Jimmy is over the moon. It's enough to cover his tuition fees, but it wasn't an infinite money glitch. The bitcoins had to come from somewhere. Silk Road had set up a mixing service to preserve user anonymity during transactions. Each time you deposited bitcoins on the site, they were mixed with other users' deposits and shuffled thoroughly. This was meant to make it harder for law enforcement to trace the money back to a particular individual. So you might think that now, with all this money, Jimmy would keep a low profile and stop. But no, Jimmy wants to know exactly how many bitcoins he can get from Silk Road, so he becomes the kind of person the Silk Road system was designed to thwart. And even worse, he talks about it on Bitcoin Talk. Someone had made a post about the largest Bitcoin address at the time, holding almost 500,000 bitcoins. Everyone wanted to know who it belonged to. Many speculated it was Silk Road, but Jimmy knew. He wrote, "I'm studying the mixer. It does absolutely nothing to hide the fact that you are using Silk Road." He linked his discoveries to a blockchain explorer, which allowed him to better understand the system in place. Jimmy posted, "It looks like he's moving around 50,000 bitcoins every 2 days." Jimmy knew all he had to do was watch the blockchain, and as soon as bitcoins were put in the withdrawal pool, he could take them all. He took action on the 21st and 24th, using a total of 9 accounts and making over 140 transactions. At the time, his bitcoins were worth $620,000, but it didn't go unnoticed. Silk Road makes money on sales commissions. In total, he earned 614,000 bitcoins, but Jimmy had taken a 1/12 of that. A few days after taking the bitcoins, the owner Dread Pirate Roberts sent him a message on one of his accounts, but it wasn't what you might expect. He didn't ask or try to threaten Jimmy to get the bitcoins back. He simply asked how the manipulation had been carried out. And when Jimmy explained, Dread Pirate Roberts even sent him more bitcoins as a thank you. So, Jimmy, 22 years old, with an alcohol, gambling, and drug problem, now had close to $1 million in his wallet. Hard to imagine what is going on in his head at that moment. That said, poor Jimmy, socially repressed, must have boasted a bit about that money. In November 2012, 2 months after obtaining the bitcoins, he created a new account on Bitcoin Talk using the pseudonym Loaded. And not only would this be his outlet to show off, but also perhaps his first mistake. On his profile, he wrote, "Bitcoin millionaire, broker, and asset manager," as a signed message using his 40,000 Bitcoin address. The signed message is proof he owns the funds, and all he was doing was posting nonsense pretending to be a big-time Bitcoin asset manager. In one post, he wrote that he had a new big client and now managed 200,000 Bitcoins in total. In another, he boasted about being responsible for recent market crashes because he was selling so much of his client's funds. And even more ridiculous things like regularly flying to China with jets and cash to buy Bitcoins at a cheaper price through private deals. He must have derived some kind of satisfaction from these lies. He loved playing the big shot, wanted people to see him as successful. He never publicly noted the true origins of the Bitcoins. But it wasn't an attempt to cover them up either. The smart thing to do would have been to stay silent. And by the end of 2013, that was truer than ever. It was on October 2nd, 2013, that Silk Road was dismantled by the FBI. They seized 170,000 Bitcoins from the founder of Silk Road, Ross Ulbricht. Even though, for the FBI, the case wasn't over, knowing that Ross Ulbricht had profited from more than 614,000 Bitcoins during this operation. Ross said that the vast majority of his earnings were reinvested in the market, but the FBI still had suspicions about the true locations of the Bitcoins. Worse, during the raid, the FBI found a copy of the Silk Road database recording all user activities, deposits, withdrawals, balances, a goldmine of information. Within this database, there were clear proofs of Jimmy's scheme, and if you knew where to look, you could easily track the transactions to see the wallet where Jimmy now kept his treasure. Suddenly, the stolen funds were much riskier, and Jimmy had to be very smart with what he did to avoid getting caught. In 2014, Jimmy earned his bachelor's degree. With Bitcoin selling just above $500 apiece, his wallet was now worth $30 million. Bored, he started making purchases that were not invisible. First, a Mercedes-Benz, which he had always dreamed of, then a house in Athens, Georgia. You can see his car parked in the driveway, with the Georgia Bulldog logo on the house, which was his favorite college sports team. Thanks. But most of all, Jimmy wanted to use this money to impress. He took trips to Miami, paid for all his friends, and even gave them free Bitcoins as gifts. Except for a brief stint installing alarm systems during the summer of 2009, he never worked. All of it was entirely funded by his Bitcoins. As the price of Bitcoin rose, he even regretted on Bitcoin Talk that he had bought his house since it had cost him over 1,000 Bitcoins at the time, and just months later, it would have been around 300. He even regretted how much he had sold for $5 worth of beer. But that didn't stop him from drinking. Over the years, as Jimmy fell deeper into addiction, his posts on Bitcoin Talk slowed down. But then, you might think that selling Bitcoins to buy a house in cash would have raised a few red flags. But no. Jimmy always paid his taxes on the Bitcoins sold. 5 years after the hack, he hadn't touched any of them. Quite incredible, but Jimmy had kept 50,000 Bitcoins through every bear and bull market. He saw his wallet fluctuate, gaining and losing millions of dollars each day. Through all of it, he never sold. He had just posted pictures of himself, saying that the only thing that kept him through his highs and lows was drugs. All of that was about to change, because in 2017, Jimmy made a post on Bitcoin Talk and got a bit more attention than he had wanted. It was in March 2017 that Jimmy found himself at the center of an intense debate within the Bitcoin community. The debate over block size divided Bitcoin users into two camps: those who support increasing the block size to improve Bitcoin's scalability, and those who believe this approach could compromise network security. Jimmy, always a staunch defender of Bitcoin's original vision, is against increasing the block size. He proposes a bold bet to Roger Ver, an advocate for increasing the block size, to exchange 1 Bitcoin for each Bitcoin Cash that Roger holds. The bet catches the community's attention, but in the end, the exchange never takes place. Jimmy disappears from the forums, probably scared by the heightened tension he had just stirred up. March 13th, 2019, in Athens, Georgia, Jimmy Zong comes home after a week away and finds his house ransacked. Panicked, he calls 911.
County 911. What is your name, sir?
It's Jimmy Zong, Z-H-O-N-G. I'm having a panic attack.
Okay. Do you need an ambulance?
La voix de Jimmy tremble, son souffle est court.
If you had an approximate amount to say the total value was for the money?
Probably close to $400,000.
Actually, it was far more than that. That night, Jimmy's report about the theft of a massive sum of money and beacons quickly caught the attention of local and federal authorities. But Jimmy hadn't anticipated that this simple complaint would trigger a chain of events leading to his downfall. The investigators from the Athens police, used to minor offenses, are stunned. Jimmy, a computer science graduate from the University of Georgia, is known for his extravagant parties and reckless spending, but he didn't expect to have such a sum of money. Lieutenant Jody Thompson, in charge of financial crimes, decides to take the case seriously. I was away for a week and someone broke into my house, Jimmy explains to the officers who arrived on the scene. They took $400,000 in cash and 150 Bitcoins, almost $600,000 in total. It was hidden behind my fireplace. Few people knew I kept the money there. The investigation starts by examining the surveillance tapes from Jimmy's house. The security cameras show a slim and agile figure who seems to know the place well. The thief cleverly avoids the cameras as if he knew exactly where they were. For private investigator Robin Martinelli, hired by Jimmy to find the culprit, it means the thief was probably someone Jimmy knew. Jimmy didn't have many real friends, explains Martinelli. There were always people around him, taking advantage of his money, but few really cared about him. I put several of his friends under surveillance, investigated the bars and houses he frequented, but something was off. Questions started to arise. Why did a young man have so much cash? What was he really doing with all those bitcoins?
What are you doing with that much cash? And I asked over and over, and he said he had invested it. It made no sense.
But Jimmy's answers are vague. I invested them, Jimmy replied. As Martinelli continues to dig, she uncovers Jimmy's troubled past. He had already been arrested for cocaine possession and drunk driving. Yet, despite his extravagant and self-destructive behavior, he always had an explanation for his wealth. He simply claimed to have invested in Bitcoin early on and gotten lucky. The real turning point in the case happens when IRS agents join the investigation. Specializing in tracking financial crimes related to cryptocurrencies, they have spent years following the trail of stolen Bitcoins from a major Silk Road hack. When the IRS discovers Jimmy's complaint, they start connecting the dots. The IRS crypto agents, armed with advanced technology to track blockchain transactions, quickly identify anomalies in Jimmy's transactions, particularly an $800 Bitcoin transfer to an exchange platform that requires personal identification information. This transfer allows agents to link Jimmy directly to the stolen Silk Road Bitcoin. The pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together, and an operation is set up to confront Jimmy at his home. On the morning of the operation, Special Agent Trevor McAleenan from the IRS and Sean Magruder, CEO of BlockTrace, accompanied by local police officers, visit Jimmy under the pretense of helping to solve his major burglary. They hope that by talking about his theft, Jimmy will reveal more information. "Hi, Jimmy. We're here to help you recover your stolen Bitcoins," says Trevor as he enters the house. Jimmy, desperate and feeling alone, lets them in without hesitation. The agents take the opportunity to explore the house, noting every detail.
This is so beautiful.
They observe an AR-15 hanging on the wall, sophisticated security systems, and an impressive network of computer servers. Finally, they ask Jimmy to open his laptop to show the Bitcoin transactions. That's when Jimmy makes a fatal mistake. By opening his digital wallet, he unintentionally exposes the magnitude of his Bitcoin holdings. "There are millions of dollars in Bitcoin here," Trevor murmurs upon seeing the screen. This is the proof they were looking for. Leaving Jimmy's house, the agents know they have their man. A few days later, a team of federal agents returns with a search warrant. This time, they methodically search Jimmy's house and in a bathroom closet. Under a pile of towels, they find a popcorn box containing a computer with millions of dollars. Jimmy is arrested and charged with money laundering and fraud. Authorities seize his assets, including the stolen Bitcoins. During his trial, Jimmy expresses his regrets, admitting that he always knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was desperately seeking to feel important and accepted. The judge takes into account mitigating circumstances, including his lack of family support and social difficulties, and sentences him to 1 year and 1 day in prison. Upon his release, Jimmy has to rebuild his life, having lost his fortune and friends. So that's the end of this first video on my channel. I hope you liked it, and if you want to support me, feel free to subscribe, leave a like, and let me know what you thought in the comments. It's thanks to your feedback that I'll keep telling you such crazy stories. All right then, ciao.